Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. I'm your podcast host, Matthew A.J. Anderson, horror author, narratologist, word nerd, and unlikely sportsman. And today, I am excited to get to the finale of this here first season of this podcast. So we're going to be talking about the last book in the CreepTown series, The Breaking Game. And I had a little bit of a teaser in the last episode saying that there's something about this book that I was really looking forward to. And so I want to start with that. What this book does, in fact, what every CreepTown book does, but I haven't been talking about it until this one, is it has on the back a little sign with a meter that says creep factor. And it goes from a smiley face to a shock horror face. And the idea is that it's what I would call a fear metric. And obviously this stuff is just for marketing, but I've seen this on some of the other books I've got in Chapter Spooks, and I think they're really cute. Like on You're Invited to a Creepover, they have the creepometer. This one has the creep factor. I've seen other books that have like a little dial that looks like, a speedometer, but it's like, keep the lights on for this one. And I find that kind of thing, well, I think it's neat, especially if you want to write a variety of different stories for your Chapter Spooks series. And so you want to be able to have your audience know, okay, this one will be a little bit scarier than the next one. I admit, the reason I was most looking forward to this book is because the last two books in the CreepTown series were both level 3 on the creep factor, half spook. But this one was number 5 out of 5. It's got this scary green screaming face to represent that this is the scariest creep factor of these books. And so I was looking forward to that. I'm wondering, okay, maybe these will be scarier. Maybe the story will be spookier. But, of course, obviously the biggest issue with these is, first of all, I would love it if all Chapter Spooks stories did this, but that's impossible because, one, it's a marketing tactic, and so industries aren't going to share their proprietary illustrations or whatnot between each other. But more importantly, fear isn't really something you can easily measure. Like, for instance, I have phobias, so if I have trouble standing in front of a statue, but I can cuddle a snake because I'm scared of statues and not snakes. Whereas for somebody else, reading a book that has vomiting in it will make them more scared than if it has beheadings, whereas for some people, it's really, really difficult to gauge that. I know the idea is that you're getting a general idea of the spookiness, especially for little kids. So it's trying to okay, this is a bit scarier for the average kid. And so, whilst I was looking forward to this because I was hoping it would be scarier, I was also curious to see how the scares were being measured by this author. I say author, even though it's on the cover and it's what you would call a paratextual element, which is to say something that is alongside the text but not in the text itself. Because Yellow Morning Press is almost entirely done by Scott Charles, I'm pretty sure he's the one who decided all this stuff. And so I was wondering how he would define the scariness. And I should probably stop bearing the lead, just tell you, unfortunately, I think this kind of fails on that level. It just kind of seems to talk about getting badly hurt and dying more, but it's not like it does it in a scarier way. It's not like it has more tension building. This is just as silly as the other books, in my opinion. But I think you can kind of see why you would say, oh, it's a little bit scary, because it does talk about violence, getting hurt, and being hospitalized and dying, and that kind of thing a little bit more than the other books. But yeah, I was a bit disappointed on the fear factor. But there was another element about this book that I was really looking forward to, which is that this is the shortest one in the series. So, is the fact that this is the shortest book and supposedly the scariest one, does that make it a good book? No, we are 0 for 3 on books I like. And honestly, after reading this book, this whole time I've been defending the author, Scott Charles. I've been saying, look, I just don't think he's a horror author. I just think he's a comedy author who's writing in the wrong genre. After reading this book, I kind of feel like he's a bad writer. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not here to go putting anyone on blast. I don't want anyone to say, oh, he's a terrible writer. Some of this could just be down to editing. And based on the fact that this is an independent author who's got his own Yellow Morning Press publishing thing, maybe the fact is that he's his own editor, and so he just needed to edit this a little bit more. But the number of times I read something in this book that was contradicted by something written in this book 2 or 3 pages later was infuriating. I feel like I was paying more attention to the story in this book than the writer was, and that is never a good sign. But you know what? I think this would make a lot more sense if we actually get into the summary. So let's get into the last book we'll be covering for Season 1 of Chapter Spooks. CreepTown number 3, the breaking game. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering, with bated breath, does this book start in medias res? Well, no. This book actually starts in the middle of a soccer match. Don't worry, we're not going to reverse to the start of it. This is actually where the book begins. We're in the middle of a soccer match, and we learn that Rebecca Stevens is a soccer player who is dangerously violent and aggressive. She has the nickname Killer Ree because she is so violent. In fact, we get into her headspace, how she's complaining that she got kicked off a few soccer teams before because she says, well, I don't think it's fair. I didn't break any rules. I mean, I did break Omi Olafsson's foot, and Yvette Saunders' nose, and Sarah Anderson's ribs, oh, and her collarbone as well. But I didn't break any rules, they need to toughen up. It's full contact sport, And I do like this. It's sort of getting you into that mindset because, I don't play sports. I'm not really that aggressive. I consider myself a pacifist. So I'm not used to thinking like that. So it sort of gets you into that mindset. And in this first chapter, we show just how dangerous she can be because she's on the field and there's a player against her with the soccer ball who's moving very quickly. Now, Rebecca has a lot of power, but she doesn't necessarily move as fast. And so when they're coming towards her, she sees that the best move she can do is she waits until they're about to kick the ball, and then she goes and kicks the ball at the exact same time. And so, like a Newton's cradle, it smacks back into her and sends the other girl flipping in what she calls a pinwheel. How she kicks the ball so hard, it makes them spin in a cartwheel and land on their head. And this is how Sarah breaks her collarbone and her ribs, because she lands so hard after flipping that she has to go to the hospital. After this match, all of the parents are yelling at the coach saying, you need to get that Rebecca girl off this team. She is so violent. She was trying to kill that girl out there. And Rebecca has been off a few teams before. In fact, the reason she's called Killer Ree is because before she lived in this town, she used to live, I think it was in California, in Venice Beach, I believe they say. And she had to go to court because a girl was coming at her. She couldn't find any way to stop her, so she grabbed her ponytail and slammed her head into the ground so hard that it caused her long-term injury. She was taken to court and they didn't charge her, but her reputation was so smeared, for being Killer Reed, the girl who's so aggressive on the field, that they had to move towns. She is that bad. And when she drives home with her mum, you can see where this comes from, because whilst her mum was listening to the coach like, yes, I see what you're talking about, we'll think about it, maybe we'll take her off the team, or maybe we'll do something about her anger issues. But when she gets in the car, away from the other parents, her mum is like, this is ridiculous, they can't do this to you, you're one of the best players on the team. And yeah, so like mother, like daughter, that's where she gets her anger from. But when we get home, it's interesting, we see that the boys in the family aren't like this, because the dad's a lot more chill and laid back, and her brother, Marshall Stevens, he isn't into sports at all. He's more of the pretty boy brains of the family. She thinks of him as perfect Marshall because he's got this cheeky smile and this naturally sitting, his hair just sits right even after he's just gotten out of bed. So he's a good looking kid who is really smart. He's always getting A grades, top grades at the class. Everyone's always saying he's really smart and good looking. And so they're kind of like polar opposites. I mean, don't get me wrong, nobody says that Rebecca is ugly or anything, but she's clearly the brawn and he is the brains. She's seen as sort of this ruffian, whereas he's sort of like the well-to-do, well-kept, pretty boy. But despite this, I believe they're about to have dinner, and so they're going up the stairs, and Marshall's like, oh, I'll race you. And so he decides to cheat because, he's not as fast as his sister. So he grabs her and pushes her back. And so she responds by shoving him, but she manages to shove him over the railing of the stairs, and he falls down with a crunch. And you know what? That's a good scene. That's a good inciting incident, but is immediately followed by one of the worst things that this book does, and it does it so often. So we'll start with this example. So her brother just fell over the railing, and there was a crunch. So that chapter ends, new chapter, they're in the hospital, and a nurse approaches them and says, I'm sorry, Mrs. Stevens, your son is dead. And then Rebecca says, that's what I thought the nurse would say. What she actually said was, he's got a very nasty bump on his head, but he's doing really well. And this book does this so often. In fact, I skipped over it earlier. When they're going to go pick up Marshall from the park, they are trying to go for the car park, they miss it, and they swerve into the park, and then a horse's head goes smashing into the windscreen. So, oh no, they've just beheaded and killed a horse. And then, oh no, roll it back. No, I was wrong. Turns out that they just rolled into one of those giant chess sets, and that was just one of the night pieces bouncing off the car. Even setting aside the fact that a real beheaded horse looks nothing like a plastic knight piece for a giant chess game. This book does this all the time with things like, later on in the book, there'll be a scene where a girl gets stabbed in the neck, and they'll say, oh no, it's a knife, and then, oh no, sorry, it's not a knife, it's actually just a needle. Or there's a scene where the coach is saying, and this is going to be a match to the death. He says, oh no, I'm just kidding, you kids are too young for that, you have to have a bit more training first. And this book does it all the time. Actually, yeah, in just a moment, our girl is going to get an invitation to go to this camp, right? But when it gets handed to her, it's in this metal tube. But when she first sees it, she thinks, oh no, they've got a gun, they're going to kill me. And I think that the author thinks that this makes the scene scarier. Because they're saying, oh, it's a knife, it's a gun, it's death, it's whatever. But it isn't scarier. What it actually does is that every time something happens in this book that is genuinely scary, the book offers something that's even scarier, and so then when you learn what it actually is, that gives you a sense of relief. Because, yes, obviously a kid dying is terrible and tragic, but a kid falling off the stairs and getting a bump on the head that requires them to go to the hospital is scary. But the fact that you just offered the opportunity of, oh, the kid died, and then you say, oh, don't worry, he didn't die, I am actually relieved to hear that he's just got a bump on his head. Or a kid getting injected with a needle with some strange chemical, that is traumatizing and potentially horrifying, but the fact that you started that off by saying she was stabbed in the neck with a knife that could kill someone, that means that learning that she was just injected by some chemical is actually a good thing. And so it's relieving. Every time this book tries to be scarier, it actually relieves the tension. And I'll try not to focus on it every single time it happens, but I swear, it happens dozens of times in this book. Just moments from now, like I said, they're in the hospital, and her brother is fine, but the fact that they're in the hospital means that they're there in the same place where she just sent one of her soccer player teammates. And when that girl's parents see her, they come barging through saying, oh, it's that girl, you're the one who attacked our daughter. And she goes holding out the invitation, which at first she thinks is a gun, but then she just sees that it's an invitation to this thing called Athletes Scared Straight. It's basically one of those youth rehabilitation camps. And they're not as popular here. I mean, I think there are a few. I'm not going to get into the whole fact that in the real world these are actually quite dangerous, because having privately run institutions for rehabilitation for youth has a lot of history of kids being institutionally abused and traumatized. So, in a sense, this book is going down the right way if they want it to be scary, but as is usually the case, it starts going cartoony, because as soon as she gets this invitation, it starts spewing out green mist, and it surrounds Rebecca, and she's wondering, is this some kind of a poison or what? And then end of chapter, new chapter, and the chapter starts with the green mist dissipating, and it's just her and her brother in the middle of some road that's apparently on their way to the Athletes Scared Straight camp. And at first I was wondering if maybe I'd misinterpreted some sort of a scene transition, but no, our main character actually says, wow, I actually teleported here. It's like the port keys in Harry Potter. Can we just collectively, as a society, stop talking about Harry Potter? It is disgusting that we are still lionizing this known transphobic bigot. Can we stop, please? But more importantly, our girl genuinely thinks that she just teleported, and then she just rolls with it. Even though her brother is there, she's like, why are you coming to Athletes Scared Straight? He doesn't really have much of an answer, except, I guess I was just following you. But then as they walk down the path, they then run into another girl who's also on the way to the camp. But she says, oh no, we're not going to Athletes Scared Straight. That camp shut down. No, they've been replaced by another camp called Topleats. And she shows them a pamphlet, which is actually shown in the book. I'm not going to quote it. But basically, it's very clear that whilst Athletes Scared Straight was all about rehabilitating kids who are very aggressive sports players, this is the exact opposite. They're trying to exacerbate the violence in these aggressive kids who play sports. It wants them to be the biggest and meanest out there. And so every kid going to this camp is going to be the biggest, meanest, nastiest athlete that there is on the field. And not long after we learn this, our kids start becoming friends with one another, but we get introduced to another character, and I have to share this scene because there's a lot going on, so I want you to hear it for yourself. Whoa, I cried. What is that? A split second later, I knew. An enormous jeep burst through the tree line, its heavy wheels churning branches to dust, its light blinding. My jaw dropped. I felt an icy jolt as I realized who was standing in its path. Marshall! Chapter 12. The Jeep charged like an angry gorilla. It frantically shook side to side. Deep rumbles rose from its engine. Time slowed to a crawl as I watched. My gaze swept the muddy ground, blurred with headlights. Marshall. Where was Marshall? I couldn't see him. Why couldn't I see him? Had the Jeep run him over? My knees buckled. The feeling of dread made me almost collapse. Then I saw it. A perfect white flash. My brother's shoe wiggled out from beneath the old tree stump. The Jeep was heading straight for him. No, I thought. Run, Marshall, run! An ugly cry left my throat. The Jeep was moving too fast. It came instantly. Bang! Its muddy wheels hit the stump. I uttered a gasp. The wheels made great crunching sounds and popped up. A second later, Marshall's head popped up too. It came flying out. Just his head. No, I thought. No way, no way! I was hyperventilating. My lungs burned with shock. And then... Oh. I saw the rest of my brother. His neck and shoulders. His perfect brown hair, waving perfectly. The Jeep had bounced up and missed him completely. I felt a rush of relief. Then an icy cold flood of pure fear. I looked up at the sky, at the blinding white headlights. The flying Jeep had found a new target. Me! I cried wordlessly. My heart screamed. I tried to run, but too late. Heavy wheels slammed in front of me. I shut my eyes. There was a roaring, squishing, churning sound. Grr, grr, grr. Huge gobs of mud splashed my face. I braced for impact, the sharp sting of Rebecca exploding. Her plain body churned into blood. Is that what I deserved? Was this karma? The sequel? 1 second. 2 seconds. I opened my eyes. Barely 2 feet away, the Jeep's wheels were mired in gunk, spinning uselessly. Stuck! Cried a voice. Cut the engine. Stop driving. The engine stopped and 2 men hopped out of the Jeep. Heaving and grunting, they pushed the Jeep out of the mud. Their pale eyes seemed to glow in the dark. So do the words on their matching teal jackets. Trainer, they said. Top Lead Academy. Uh-oh, Zoe whispered, just as a voice shouted. Got her! The trainers rushed up to Zoe, their eyes frantic. How did you escape? They demanded. Dr. Lobotis is fuming. You were not cleared for physical activity. Zoe's voice trembled. She tried to explain. It wasn't me, Coach Kellyache. He asked... Kellyache? They roared. That old bear doesn't make the rules. We do. We're in charge, not the coach. We're taking you back, Zoe. Back to your cell. But first, one of the trainers helped Zoe to the ground. As she lay on her back, his partner reached into the Jeep. He pulled out what looked like a hose wheel. Maybe a lawnmower? It made a horrible squelch. What is that? I shouted. The trainers didn't answer. One of them slid a hand down the wheel. A layer of sticky white tape peeled away. Sports tape, I realized. A huge roll of sports tape. The trainers grinned and tamped it down again. Fresh, they agreed. It's good tape. There were more squelching sounds as the trainers wheeled the tape across Zoe. Flat on her back, she spun around like a rolling pin. They didn't stop until her whole face was covered. She looked more mummy than ever. You crazy? I cried. She could suffocate. Who are you? Where's your uniform? A trainer eyed me suspiciously, but before I could speak, his partner said, Over here, another runaway. So, a lot just happened. Another one of those rollback freak-out scares that I was talking about. But also, we get shown a little bit about how strict the trainers are and all that. But more than anything, what's bothering me is, the names of these characters. We've got Coach Kellyache and Dr. Lobotis. Wow, I wonder what he does. But then, another example of how this writer just doesn't seem to understand how onomatopoeia works. He consistently describes sports tape. Now, I had to look it up. I didn't know what that was, but apparently it's kinesiology tape. I have seen sports people use it. I just didn't realize that some people called it sports tape. But this book consistently describes the noises they make of unraveling it and using it as squelching. Squelching. The sound of tape. You know this sound. They describe that as squelching. Now, personally, I would describe that as ripping. Or maybe creaking or squeak, although often with a thicker tape, like masking tape or kinesiology tape, it would have a deeper sound, so I'd describe it as a loud, ripping, tearing sound. Not squelching. There's nothing wet about it at all. And yeah, them wrapping her up like a mummy is sort of cartoony, but on the one hand, it does play into some of the plot line later that this is special tape, as they say. But yeah, it's just another example of how they take what could be a very scary premise and make it into something that's quite silly. So they bundle all these kids into the Jeep and they drive them to the Top Lead Academy. And when they get there, the first thing we see is that this is not some cabin out in the woods beside some lake. They're actually going to a prison, like with walls and wardens and spotlights and guards. And when they go through, they actually get stopped and they say, all right, hand over everything in your pockets, give all your electronic devices and your phones. They actually get a mugshot taken, and they go through all of these, get their fingerprints and everything done. Which, I mean, I guess that might be scary to a kid, but to me, it would be scary if it was more realistic, if they were actually going to one of these camps. Then again, I will admit that's because I'm a big fan of the summer camp horror story. We haven't seen any in Chapter Spooks thus far, but I actually am really fond of that trope personally, even though we don't have summer camp in Australia because our education system actually values learning. And when they get into the prison, we get introduced to our next character, Coach Arthur Kellyache, who is a pirate. They describe him as having one eye, a huge beard, he's like covered in muscles, and there's even very quickly we get an understanding from the main character that his office is full of trophies, but it's clear that he didn't win them, he stole them. You know, like a pirate hoarding treasure. The one thing that really annoys me though is that they say he's got one eye. And the very first thing we learn is that he's got one eye, he's watching with one eye, and it's not until like 3 chapters later that we learn that he doesn't have an eye patch like I thought he had, but instead he's got some of that tape over his eye. Even though I think that that's a visual thing that you should probably tell the reader. I mean, it's a visual thing, why would you not? But anyway, what matters is that our kids are talking to him because Rebecca's saying, I shouldn't be here, like, I didn't actually get signed up to this. But he shows her a form with her parents' signatures and her signature on it. So she believes it's real, but she doesn't remember any of this stuff. And so she doesn't know what happened. But then she says, oh, but what about my brother? He shouldn't be here at all. He's not even an athlete. But then her brother corrects her and says, no, I am an athlete. I am a chess player. And Coach Kellyache seems to run with this, partly because he seems to think it's funny. But if you're wondering, why would Marshall want to be at this athlete school full of dangerous people? Well, the reason is that when they met Zoe, she had mention of there being some big prize if you go through this, and we'll later learn that it's $5 million is on the line for the 2 winners who can beat every other athlete in this camp. So he's doing it for the money. And I like Rebecca's final plea is saying, well, look, no, you can't do this. We have rights. You can't just make us go into these dangerous games where we're going to attack each other. And his response is to say, yeah, I can. It's in the contract. And he shows her the contract. You know what? I don't like the cartoony stuff in this, but I have to admit, even I found it amusing and mildly scary that she reads a contract that says, official waiver of child rights. It has a decapitation policy, emergency brain sampling, procedures in case of death or dismemberment. And when she's saying, well, this makes no sense, I don't remember signing this, Kellyache says, well, it's obviously because you've suffered a sports injury. You're having some issues with your memory. And I guess this is the book's way of explaining why that weird mist thing happened and she appeared on the road. But there's no way out of it now. So Kellyache says, look, this is all over, so head off to your cell and meet your cellmate. I mean, I think he says room, but they are cells. This is a prison, they're in cells. I think they actually say that they put them in handcuffs when they take them to the cells. I don't know, I guess, again, I think the author just thinks that kids in a prison is a scary concept. But then we get another moment, which I actually think is quite clever. So Rebecca goes to her room, and she's not in the room with Marshall. No, when she gets to her cell, they introduce her to her roommate, Maddie Bishop. And that is the name of the girl whose ponytail she grabbed and threw her head into the ground. But the girl she's looking at doesn't look the same. It's obviously the same girl, same face, same long ponytail, but she is covered in muscle. You know, and she is explaining that ever since Rebecca Stevens threw her head into the ground, she vowed that no one else was ever going to hurt her like that ever again. And so she trained, she practiced, she became a killing machine to make sure that she's going to do the hurting from now on. No one's going to hurt her again. And now that Rebecca Stevens is back in her life, she's going to get her revenge. Now, this book has a lot of stupid things in it. I've got to say, that's one that I really love. That is clever. But it's slightly taken down a peg because we start getting a couple of examples of things that this book does, which are just stupid. Like, this is what I was talking about when I said that maybe they're just editing mistakes. But the first thing is that it says, you know, very scary line. It says that with Maddie in the cell with me, I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. And then we get a little bit of her thinking about how she was usually so aggressive and how she's thinking about how she should be a better person. She should be a new Rebecca who's not this killer character. But then, end of chapter, new chapter, and it says, I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up alone and my duffel bag was in the room. But just a page ago, you told me she didn't get a wink of sleep that night, and now you're saying that she fell asleep? And then the same thing happens later on, where when they get into the field to do their first bit of practice, I guess, one of the kids has his phone, and he's saying, why doesn't this thing work? And the coach grabs it and smashes it to show, I guess, that he's really mean. But just a few pages ago, in fact, you can even rewind this podcast and listen to it, when they were admitted to this prison facility, they took their phones away. So how did the kid have his phone? And the only reason this scene exists is so that Coach Kellier can say, the only working phone in this facility is in my office. So you didn't need to add that scene. He could have just told them that. Or we could have just had our kid say that in the earlier scene when she was in his office. She could have said, I want to call my parents, and him saying, no, nobody's allowed a phone. Like, you could have done that then. He could have said, this is the only working phone and you're not getting it until you're assigned to your room, you know? Something like that. And then the next part, this is what really downgraded the book, because yeah, I wasn't really enjoying all this stuff, but I really like this premise. There's this aggressive girl and she gets sent to this aggressive camp that's supposedly for rehabilitation, but it's actually secretly about making them more aggressive, and so she has to deal with these other aggressive kids and sort of learn a lesson about violence. But every single sport in this book happens between the chapters. I am not kidding. Every single main event in sport happens, we have our kids do this, and then that chapter ends, new chapter starts, and it says, oh, that was a really rough match, you know, and then we get our kids talking about that after the fact. Or after the scene, we get a scene where our kids are doing archery, and the whole point of this is that it's meant to be our guy explaining, oh, well, you know how to get better at the sport, it's not about precision or whatever, it's about having killer instinct, you gotta think of your enemy and the target. And personally, I mean, this is a little side note. As I was reading this book, my brain was sort of editing, trying to fix it. If you ask me, I think the whole scene would have been better if instead of it being archery, it had been axe throwing. Because not only is that really dangerous, but there's two scenes. One of them where he shows a girl, he says, why did I miss? And she says, because your form was wrong. And he gets angry and he puts the bow and arrow in her face and then turns and hits the target. But if you were throwing axes, you have to swing an axe in order to throw it anyway. So that would have been a better fake out, because she would have said, oh, you were throwing it wrong, and then it would have stared her in the face, swung the axe across her neck, and obviously missed her neck, but you have to fling the axe anyway, and then it would hit the target and then say, see, I imagined her face was right there, and that's how I got the target. Like, that's scarier, and kids throwing axes is scarier. Archery to me just doesn't feel like that aggressive of a sport. No shade to archers out there, by the way. I've never done archery, so if I'm completely wrong, feel free to correct me. You know, I do have an email address. You can send chapterspooks@gmail.com and saying, you know nothing about archery, and I will respond and say, you are correct. But yeah, the point is, this scene could have been so much better if they didn't have a targeting sport, because in fact that chapter even ends with him going to Ree and pointing an arrow in her face, and then he stops because a kid gets injured and he's distracted by that Jeep with the trainers in it and their squelchy tape. But as everyone's distracted, sort of, you know, looking at this scene, Maddie has seen that our girl is standing there, and so she does a running tackle, and I think either she jumps out of the way or Zoe pushes her out of the way, but what matters is that, yes, there's end of paragraph, new chapter, and we learn that instead of hitting Rebecca, Maddie hit Zoe, and she looks bad. Like, it was a heavy hit. In fact, Rebecca's convinced that Zoe is dead because she just ragdolls, falls on the ground. And so she gets taken away by the trainers as well. And the idea is that for the next few scenes, she's like, I can't believe it. I have to get out of this place. They killed my first ever friend in this place. There's no way that my brother's going to survive. And it's not important to the scene, but we also mention that she sees her brother again, and he's wearing a tuxedo because she's wearing a soccer uniform, and the girl who's good at fencing is wearing a full fencing outfit. And so everyone's wearing their respective uniforms for their chosen sport. But because his chosen sport is chess, apparently they get chess players to wear tuxedos? I didn't think that was the case, but okay, you do you, book. It just makes it seem weird that we've got ourselves a little tiny James Bond running around. And also we learn that Rebecca's being melodramatic anyway, because Zoe is revealed later, in a later scene where we skip over several days of sport and they say that they're on the field. They are talking about the prize money, how it's now 5 million, all that stuff. And then the trainers arrive in their Jeep. Oh wait, no, sorry, it's a van this time. I don't know when it transitioned to being a van. Honestly, I think that it's always been a van, but they didn't mention it was a van until now. But they say, oh, we've got reinforcements, and they bring back the kids who've been wrapped up in tape and have been brought back. And when they reveal all these kids, what happens is they come out of the van and they're all basically, they got white eyes, like their eyes have rolled back in their head, and they're all saying, kill, kill, kill. And when Coach Kelly gets too close to Zoe, she attacks him like a rabid dog and like tears a chunk out of his beard. And he's like, oh, geez, this one's got fighting spirit. And so, wow, the kids who got injured disappeared, went to a guy called Dr. Lobotus and came back with white eyes and they're zombified saying, kill, kill, kill. I wonder what this thing is doing to the kids. Wow, you're right. I mean, I don't know what you said, but you're definitely right, because it's so obvious that this school is like lobotomizing these kids and turning them into killer zombies. That is so on the nose. Like, where's the build-up? Where's the plot? I mean, there's a bit of a plot twist later, but it's honestly kind of blah. And also, it's around about this point in the book, it started to sour on me. And literally, it did the same thing that the last book did, although thankfully, not as much of a slap in the face as that one. So, I like the way that this book started, because it was getting us into the mindset of this aggressive character. Like, okay, we're introducing you to our main character who's this aggressive, rough, character. Here's how they think. But around about this point in the story, without any motivation, without any plot reasoning, our main character just decides that she's been too aggressive, and she is now officially horrified at the violent person she's been, and she's decided that she's going to turn over a new leaf. She's going to be new Rebecca, none of this violence. She's going to get out of here and be a better person. And in fact, a few chapters from now, she thinks back on some of the things that she's done to her friends, playing soccer, like the broken ribs and stuff, and she's crying and thinking about how disgusting and horrifying these are. And I'm going, what happened to the main character? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm fine with character growth, but this was not character growth. It's like overnight somebody just hit the reset button on an NPC CPU and she rebooted and had wiped the hard drive, and now she's not the same person anymore. There's no reason for her to change. There's no growth. It's not like something happened to her or she learned something or had some epiphany. She's just sitting there and decides, well, I think I'm responsible for all the nasty things I've done, so I'm gonna not do them anymore. Even though literally the first chapter was explaining how she justifies in her head that she's doing the right thing, she's just playing the game. Now, some of you might be wondering, hey, what about her little brother? He's not an athlete at all, and people are so aggressive that they're having to mummify people just to get them to the doctor. How is he surviving all this? Well, it turns out he's using his chess master skills to play tactically. So what he's done is he has paired up with the fencing girl. I guess people say she's like the masked menace or whatever. She's one of the most aggressive people in this whole camp besides Killer Ree. Using either his wits or his charm, Marshall has teamed up with her, so now if anyone gets within spitting distance of Marshall, she's there with her fencing foil and threatening them to stay back. So as the story's progressing, more and more kids are getting hurt, meaning more and more kids get wrapped up, taken away, come back as these zombified drone things. And I'm going to tell you where my mind was going, because my assumption for the ultimate twist of this book, I thought what they were doing was that they were recruiting zombified child soldiers who were known to be aggressive so that they could use them in the military or some such thing. And so my assumption then was that Marshall was being slowly prodded into becoming a field marshal general who has the tactics to lead these zombified killers, because obviously they have been droned out into mindless zombies, so you need to have a brain on the field who could lead them. I thought that's an interesting plot. That could be where this is going. I was wrong, but I'm going to tell you right now that's where my mind was going. I wonder if you can tell where this is going, because the only hints that you get to this is that we don't actually see Dr. Lobotus, and there's also some hints at there being some boss lady who is behind the $5 million prize and some network, because the idea is that this is all leading up to the kids finding those two winning players who are going to face off in the titular game, the breaking game. There's going to be one final match between them, and then the winner gets the $5 million. So things come to a head when they decide to have a hockey match, and one of the kids is acting all scared, like, I don't want to be here, I gotta get out, I gotta escape. And so Coach Kelly decides to punish him using one of the most dangerous players in the entire camp. He chooses Killer Ree. He sends her on the field and says, show this kid what killer instinct is all about. But she's a changed person now, so she just decides to use smart tactics to actually get the hockey puck into the net, even though Kellyanne was basically saying, go in there and beat the crap out of him, like it's a hockey match. But she's just playing the game instead. Because he's getting all upset and he sees that she's not fighting aggressively, he forces her to by sending Maddie onto the field to attack her. And this just means that she has to do her best to hide and duck, and the only way that she can protect herself is by jumping into the net. I think because I don't play sports, I guess that the other team isn't allowed in the net, that makes some sense. But this is when she realizes the only way she's going to survive is if she escapes. So after that match, she's in her room thinking, how do I get out of here? She doesn't even know where her brother is, and so she's like, well, what would Marshall do? And that gets her an idea. See, one of the things that she knows her brother does is that he fakes injuries all the time. If she gives him a little shove, he'll fall on the ground and act like she just punched him. So the next time they're out playing, she takes a single step and then starts screaming and crying that she's twisted her ankle. Coach Kellyanne immediately calls for the trainers to come and get her wrapped up and then taken away. And there's a whole lot of nonsense because apparently they put them in body bags every time, which is stupid, but in order to get away from that, they say that the zipper's not working, so they don't put her in a body bag. And then also, I was confused because every time a character gets injured, clearly they wrap them up in the tape, because that's the whole point. But the trainers forget to wrap her up in the tape at first, and so I was like, oh, okay, that's a convenient way to stop her from getting wrapped up. But then they stop halfway through as they're driving the van and say, oh, we forgot to wrap her up, and then they go wrap her up then. And then they start driving. So it's just, you could have streamlined this, man. You don't have to make things this complicated. But when she gets wrapped up in the tape, even though she's bound up and she feels like she's suffocating, as she's wrapped up in the tape, she feels this sort of cool breeze that sort of goes into her lungs. But it's horrifying because she's not breathing. It feels like someone's forcing air into her lungs and forcing her to feel better. And she also seems to hear like this whispering voice, like, go to sleep, let us in, just calm down. So, this is obviously the first stage in whatever mind control is going on. Despite the fact that no other player has been able to do this, she manages to bite through the tape and tears it off. And as she throws it off, it starts shriveling up, and I was like, oh, that's a really cool effect. And then it turns into dust, which is a less cool effect, because I don't know how that makes any sense. I thought it was shriveling up because it had ran out of energy, because it wasn't feeding off of her and, feeding into her body. But turning into dust, I don't get that. Especially if it makes a squelching noise, how did it lose all of that moisture? But anyway, what matters is that as she's driving there, then they hear an explosion, and because these are the medical guys, they're like, oh no, we have to go, and so they swing the car around, but at this time she was about to sneak out the back, and so she goes flying out the side door, rolling over on the grass. Thankfully nobody sees her, but she's right there back at the prison, next to a big sign that says Dr. Lobotis's lower cells entrance. And so our girl goes down, and in fact, you know what? I'm gonna get this from the book because I think this is a weird little moment, but I think it's the closest we ever get to Dr. Lobotis. Moans echoed through a crack in the bottom. My blood chilled. Dr. Lobotis, the lower cells. It was the last place I wanted to be. Chapter 33. Accompanying the moans was a slow, almost teacherly voice, an elderly man voice. I crept as close as I dared, listening hard. Rule number 7.01.A, the voice lectured. The playing field shall be laid out according to the recommended dimensions contained in... Ah! Someone screamed. There was a squelching sound. Oh, it was not very painful, I think. Pay attention, please. There was a sharp clink of metal on metal, and the voice resumed. GR 702.1. A violation is any act prejudicial to the best interests of... Beneath the door came a moan and a lightning flash. You will learn or you will cry. Understand? Lady Oksana insists. Now then, Rule 23.3.2. 3 arrows per team shall be shot at each. I turned away as another voice, another kid, gave a horrible wail. Could I sneak into prison through Dr. Lobotis' door? Did I dare? What do you think? Stick to the plan, I told myself, jogging far, far away from there. This isn't about Dr. Lobotis, it's about the phone in Coach Kellyake's office. If I found the phone, I could tell my story to Mum and Dad and the nightmare would end. Police would descend on Lake Falls. Everyone, including the kids I just heard, would be safe. Now look, I'm annoyed that we didn't get to see Dr. Lobotis. I thought he was the main villain. but I guess he's kind of not. And also, the character has no motivation to go in there, so I kind of accept that. What I don't accept is what happens next. So, a girl gets into the office. She does have to do a little bit of, sneaking around. She can't actually go through the main hall, so she ends up climbing one of the towers where she sees that there's a flag that looks like a pirate flag, and hey, that's got to be Coach Kelly, because he's a freaking pirate. So she climbs up, and she gets into a room, which, I'll just mention this offhandedly, because I found it weird and sort of cartoony, but it turns out that it's full of plush animals and like candy, and there's like a whole rack that has little bags of goldfish, like the ones you win at the fair. And our girl realizes that this is just another example of his piracy, how he steals winning prizes, including goldfish that you win at the fair, but he doesn't actually put them in tanks, so only a few of them are still swimming, which is, I guess it's a horror book, but that's not the kind of gross horror that I was imagining, the idea of some poor goldfish slowly dying in this little bag. But then she gets to the office, and personally, I hated this. Because she gets to the office, she gets to the phone, she picks it up, she hears a dial tone, and so then she reaches for the numbers, and it's only at that point that she realizes that she doesn't know her mother or her father's telephone number. I had to think about this. I'm willing to accept that in this modern age of mobile phones, where you just tap contact mum or dad, there are some people who don't know people's telephone numbers. I accept that, that makes sense. What I don't accept is that she didn't realize this until now. So I'm thinking, okay, fine, you don't know that, we'll just call the police or something. Everyone knows their number, even America. I know America's 911. So what she does is that she tries calling her parents on her best guess of their phone number. Apparently she's calling a landline. I'm not used to that, but she does know the area code and the first few digits. So she tries something and it fails. It says number not in service. So then she goes, okay, I'll call the police then. So she calls 911 and the phone says, you're exceeding your one phone call per day. And then, before she hangs up the phone, she feels that same wet, cold, creeping feeling that she got from the tape, coming from the phone. And I guess maybe a kid being invaded by some sort of creepy, potentially medical brain entity is kind of scary. But I personally thought it would have been scarier if that scene ended with her being caught, because when this thing sneaks into her ear and infects her, she wakes up after the drug is worn off, and she is in custody with the trainers and that, who found that she was trying to use the phone. So I thought it would have been scarier if she got caught, because that was what she was scared of. She snuck in there and was hoping that she wouldn't get caught by Coach Kellyache if she got caught. But whatever, that doesn't matter. What matters is that then they throw another curveball at us, which is they say that explosion that happened was because they were doing go-kart racing. We'll talk about that at the end. But so they were doing go-kart racing, and then apparently there was a crash and an explosion, and they say that her brother, and in fact several people, died in the explosion, to the point that they say that she is now in the running to win the $5 million because the other kids, they basically say they're dead. So a whole bunch of kids died in an explosion, you're now winning the match, which, alongside Deus Ex Machina, is just weird, especially because our girl is like, oh no, my brother is dead. But, I have to reveal something here. I didn't believe for a second that her brother was dead, and it's not just plot armor or whatever. The reason why I knew her brother wasn't dead is because throughout this whole book, this book keeps doing that reverse fake-out rollback thing, but they also keep doing death threats for a main character. So when she gets nearly hit by the Jeep, it's like, oh no, I'm going to die. When the girl goes tackling towards her with that tackle she wasn't expecting, oh no, I'm going to die. When they say that there's a match on the field and he says, oh, you're going to have to fight to the death, oh no, I'm going to die. Or during that hockey match, when she was getting tackled by the other players, she's like, oh no, I'm going to die. And the fact that this book keeps doing it means that clearly this author has not read The Boy Who Cried Wolf, because after the first few fake-outs, I wasn't believing it anymore. And for the record, I'm right, it's no spoiler, her brother is fine, but you can't keep going to the top shelf, here's the biggest, scariest thing that could possibly happen, because I'm not going to believe it, especially a book like this that's written in first person, where your main character is the narrator. I know for a fact that there's too many pages between me and the back cover of the book for you to kill off the main character, so I'm not going to believe it. But we're finally on the home stretch now. So a girl is all upset about the fact that her brother's died and that she's going to be put into the breaking game. And because she's turned over a new leaf, she doesn't think she's going to be able to fight Maddie because Of course it's Maddie. Maddie's the one who survived, of course. So she's not sure how she's going to deal with this. This is meant to be, you know, the dark night of the soul, where she's trapped in her cell thinking about how she's going to survive all of this. And then her brother appears. Big shocker, he wasn't dead. But he appears and he explains that they need to escape, they need to get out of here. He reveals that the explosion was a tactic that he used to cause a distraction so that he could sneak away, so he could work out his plan for him and his sister to escape. And so Rebecca's like, okay, so you had a plan this whole time, but I mean, what about the kids? Are they okay? He says, oh no, they should be fine. You know, those trainers are really good. But I think everyone's okay. We just need to get out of here. So they sneak down into the bowels of this whole facility. He says that they have sneaking tunnels like the tentacles of an octopus, and he leads her through to a deep beneath even the labs and further through until they finally find some hatch that leads out onto a big open field. So he goes running through, and Rebecca follows him, and she calls after him saying, Marshall, Marshall, where did you go? And then she hears a big whoosh. Actually, yeah, I gotta say this, first time ever that our author uses the right onomatopoeia, because he uses the whoosh for a sudden burst of flame, of gaslit back flame, as this huge stadium lights up with fire and field lighting to show that he led her to the breaking game. And here's where we get all their big twists and reveals, because she walks over there and then she sees Maddie, and she's wondering where her brother is, and Maddie reveals, oh, don't you realize that he betrayed you? And then her brother appears with the fencing girl, and she says, why are you even helping him? And then fencing girl takes off her mask and reveals Maddie, because it turns out Maddie had an identical twin sister who also played sport, and because there was this viral video going around that showed Killer Ree grabbing a girl by the ponytail and smacking her into the ground, a lot of people assumed that it was this Colleen girl, this fencing girl, and so she had to cut her ponytail and they had to move town and she had to change all of this, and so they both hate her for destroying their family's reputation, you know, into becoming like a victim. And that's the reason why she paired up with Marshall, because she was keeping him as sort of a guarantee that she could use that as part of their revenge, because they wanted to get the four of them into this last match so that they could destroy the Stevens siblings, basically. Although, I've got to say, it's a little confusing, because throughout this whole book they've been implying that there's only going to be two winners, and I thought that they were leading up to the idea that the breaking game would be between those two, but now it's between four people? And then we learn about Marshall. So as they split the two teams off, you know, the two bishops against the two marshals, Rebecca's saying, what on earth are you doing? Why would you do this? You're not an athlete. Why would you put me in this situation? And he reveals, well, it's because I really wanted that money, and I used my tactical skills and realized that you can beat them. Even if I'm on your team, I knew that you'd be able to protect me. She says, what are you talking about? He says, no, don't you understand? I know that you are the best player out there. You are incredible. I look up to you. The reason why I've tried to be as good as I am at things like chess and school is because I know I'm no good at sports, and I wanted to be good at something so I could be just like my big sister. And you know what? We're gonna have to get to the ending before I can talk all about all this stuff. So just hold on to that for a moment, because he basically says, look, I know you've been turned over this new leaf, but I need you to be the violent Rebecca now. And so she just does. So as the two bishops are charging at them, they're ready for a tackle, I think she ends up protecting Marshall. And then as he falls over and the one with the sword, Colleen, is like threatening him, like, how do you like your little pipsqueak or whatever, you know, she goes into full-on rage, you know, Mama Bear protect me, or I guess Sister Bear in this case, and she runs at the ball. And I literally told you all of the action happens between chapters. Chapter end, new chapter, and the announcer is just screaming, a double pinwheel. So I guess apparently she kicked the ball against both of their legs. Even though in the first chapter, the way they describe the pinwheel is that you kick the ball at the same time as they kick the ball, which causes the whole Newton's cradle, them swinging back. Doesn't actually make sense. Whatever, doesn't matter. What matters is the book is nearly over. So she manages to kick the ball, swings it around, and I guess for thematic reasons, the sword goes flying and cuts off the ponytail of the girl with the ponytail, because she's been using that to like whip people with it, and so Yeah, and then our kids are the winners, so they're like, yay, you win, and they bring out a big trophy. And then we get introduced to the actual main antagonist, I guess, Lady Oksana. So some lady comes flying down. Actually, no, sorry, the drones come down. I think she just walks out. What matters is she's got the trophy. She's like, wow, congratulations, you win. And then she reveals, I think apropos of nothing, I don't know why this happens, but she says, yeah, this is my master plan all along. Right, so here we go. So I thought it was for military reasons. What did you think the twist was? Because the twist was, she says, my whole plan was that I would deliberately make these really aggressive kids to follow the rules because I was a gymnast and I lost because they said that I broke a rule because my coach gave me some cough medicine and that counted as an illicit substance or whatever. And so, yeah, some rule. And so she says, so I'm deliberately going to ruin all sports because I'm going to show that sports are inherently violent, because I'm going to get all these aggressive kids who are deliberately playing by the rules, but they're going to still hurt people because sports are inherently violent. And so, ha ha ha, when I do this, that means that sending these kids out there, when other parents see just how much their kids get hurt by kids playing by the rules, they're going to take their kids out of sport, and that's going to destroy children's sport forever. Now, we're going to set aside for the moment that it doesn't make any sense to me that you would brainwash violent kids into being violent because they're already violent. But honestly, I actually kind of thought this was relatively clever, because the reason I jumped to military is because I thought this book was leaning towards the idea of turning these into the best sports players ever. But I was thinking, no, that doesn't make any sense, because if you're training kids to be really aggressive players, then the instant that they get out on the field, other parents are going to say, yeah, no, I don't want them to play with that kid because he's dangerous, get him off the field. And so this is kind of clever, because the very reason I thought it's a bad idea turns out to be the goal of the villain. She wants kids to stop playing sport, and so she's deliberately making these bad sportsmen, effectively, to scare parents into taking their kids off sport so that we can get rid of it entirely. Okay, kind of interesting. But it doesn't matter anyway, because this is the end of the book, and we very quickly learn that as she's taking over the world, like, oh, the drones will take over, haha, and then evil Killer Ree comes back and is all aggressive. We get to the end of the book, epilogue, she wakes up, she's in Vanuatu or something with her parents. There was some hint at them going to Vanuatu, and they're like, oh, yeah, turns out, well, funny story, you are here because, well, when we were in the hospital, you just apparently wandered into some room with a biohazard thing in it. You weren't supposed to go in there, but honestly, the signage wasn't very good, so we're going to sue the hospital, basically. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that they said that you'll be fine, although you may have some very vivid hallucinations. Oh, and apparently also, and she's like, oh, where's Marshall? Why isn't he here? Is he not coming on holiday? And they say, oh no, he's off on a press tour because he won some amazing chess match and he's going to be really, really rich. Okay, story's over now. That's the end. I think I need to start this with the disclaimer that I am incredibly biased, because, I mean, as I said at the top of this episode, I consider myself to be a pacifist. Now, I'm not an idiot when it comes to violence. My position is that you can respond to violence with violence because you're in a desperate situation, but my view is that every situation with violence could have been avoided better without violence. If you're responding to violence, it's because the other side has already made the wrong decision first, but they shouldn't have made that decision in the first place. I think that we shouldn't be violent. I don't think violence is a good thing. I think it is inherently vicious, and whilst I will support anyone who uses violence to protect themselves from violation and violence, I still think that there are other options that we should seek out if possible. So, when it turns out that the main moral of this book appears to be that our main character is violent and cruel and dangerous, and apropos of nothing, she switches her character. Okay, that's weird. But I was willing to go with it because I thought, okay, well, at least that's a good lesson to teach the kids. But then the book ends with our main character learning that the thing that her brother looked up to in her, the thing that he idolized about her, was the fact that she was dangerous. He even says that those are the best parts about her. He doesn't actually say, like, I would be fine. I would be perfectly fine. Like I said, if someone's violent to you, be violent back. That makes sense. Like, obviously, if she's defending herself from the other players, that's fine. But he doesn't say, I need you to protect me. He says, I need Killer Ree back. He says, I want the menace from Venice Beach. I need you to be the dangerous person you were, because that's the best parts of you. And that is a disgusting thing to tell children. Violence is not good. And honestly, yeah, I recognize that in the real world, obviously things get complicated, but these are kids' books. You shouldn't be teaching kids that violence is good. And so many of these decisions just make this book less interesting. Like the fact that she starts off being aggressive, I thought that was interesting at first, because I thought, okay, so we got ourselves a character who is aggressive, but then in order to make the story scary, she keeps going, oh, look at those dangerous people. Oh, no, I'm in danger. Even though the book states outright that she is either the most or the second most dangerous person at this camp. And yet, even before her big revelation, oh, maybe I should be a better person, hey, maybe you should. But even before then, she is terrified of these other kids. And I mean, yeah, she's terrified of the coach as well, although even the way that she was talking about it before, I don't even think she should be scared of him. But still, it doesn't make any sense that she would be both at the same time. You can't be scary and angry and powerful and also terrified. Like, I do recognize that sometimes anger comes from a place of fear and response, but they don't play it like that. They don't play like she's angry but she's secretly scared inside. They play it like she's a scared, whimpering little mouse anytime anything that any other Chapter Spooks protagonist would usually flinch at, even though that's not her character. Like, surely it would be so much better if, instead of her being aggressive, that she was actually small. Like, maybe she didn't belong at the camp. Like I said, I kept rewriting this story in my head as I was reading it. I couldn't get out of my editor's brain, and I was thinking up a story that I thought would be so much better. Like I said, the scene with the arrows, I thought that'd be better with axes. The scene where our character wants to change who she is, I thought, well, maybe you could do some character growth. Or then I had an idea that I thought would have improved this book so much. So, here's the story that I wished I was reading, that my brain was writing as I was reading this book. And usually I will backtrack and say, I don't think it was much better. But honestly, no, this is a good idea. Listen, this is what I think this book should have been. Our book should have started by introducing us to our main character, Rebecca Stevens, who is a small, weedy, but good-looking girl who is seen as the bright star of the family because her older sister, Marsha, is a very aggressive, violent sports player. Rebecca looks up to her bigger sister because she protects her. Yes, she's a bit of a geek and a nerd, and so that's the reason why her sister became this way in the first place, was because she wanted to protect her younger sister, but it also means that she's an incredible sports player. She's the top of the sports team. She's the soccer player of the year, but it has brought her into scandal, both on the field and also when people threaten her little sister. Marsha has turned to violence that has actually put them in court before. Thankfully, she didn't get charged, but Marsha is on the blacklist of a lot of soccer teams, and she was about to be on this one as well because she just did a special move that she called the pinwheel to another player. She claims it's because the other player came at them with the ball, but our main character knows it's because earlier that day she insulted her little sister. And rather than going home and all this nonsense, after that scene, the family will go to the hospital because Marsha has been told that she needs to apologize. So she goes to apologize, but it turns out the other girl is either unconscious because of drugs or in some sort of a coma. I'm leaning towards coma because that leans at how dangerous this girl actually is. And so they say, you need to apologize to her parents. And Marsha outright refuses, says, this has nothing to do with them. They are the people who say they want to kick me off the team. And so that causes the great big argument. And in my head, I imagine this turning into a scene where, because of the commotion, Marsha will accidentally bump her little sister and hurt her. And this is when Marsha finally admits, okay, maybe I'm a bit violent. And she will agree when the other parents say, we are willing to not take you to court and send you to juvie because that's what you deserve for doing this to our daughter, if you agree to go to this rehabilitation camp. So she says, okay, I'll go to this rehabilitation camp. And the parents say, okay, well, you go to that whilst little Rebecca, she's going to come with us on the vacation we had planned, so you're going to be going to that instead. Rebecca says, no, send me to the camp as well. And they're saying, no, but it's a reform camp. She says, no, it should be fine. I mean, I don't mind. I'll do a bit of sport. Usually they have a chess program. And admittedly, the main reason Rebecca's doing it is partly she feels a little bit guilty because she thinks that she's responsible for the reason why Marsha attacked this girl. But also, she doesn't want it to feel like a punishment. She knows that it seems like Marsha's going down a dark path, and she wants to stay with her sister to make sure that she is a loved part of the family, that she doesn't become some black sheep. So that's where the story starts. And screw the whole gas thing. It doesn't need to be a dream. You don't need that. Instead, they go to this rehabilitation camp. But instead of it being prison, no, it's an actual camp with a big field where people play sports. But it's revealed, as soon as they get there, that they are very strict. They take away all phones, and they are trying to make sure that kids follow the rules. But when they get on the field, they say, oh, this is where you let out your aggression. Right? So that's when they encourage kids to be violent. And this is because, just like before, this actually is trying to get kids to be really aggressive and rough. But what about little Rebecca? Well, she says, hey, I'll do the chess thing. And they'll decide, you know what? You're pretty smart when it comes to tactics. In fact, you're so good at chess. In fact, little side note, in my head, she's good at speed chess. That one where you have to move, click, move, click. And so she is capable of thinking on her feet. And so that means that she is capable of thinking of sports tactics. And so the coach decides, hey, what if I kept you under my wing? And instead of you playing sports, we sort of did this as a bit of a coach trainee sort of program. And so this means that our kid will watch as her sister is going through all of these aggressive and rough matches. And as she starts off, she tries to do the whole, okay, well, you can do it like this. Okay, you don't need to be so rough. The coach will say, no, you're teaching wrong. That's not how you coach. You need to teach them to be aggressive. Think of them like villains. If you had knives, you'd be stabbing them in the throat. You need to be killers out on the field. And so this is when she starts realizing just how dark things are. And so when the kids are actually fighting in their bunks and stuff, or they realize that there are wardens, like, I like, in my mind, the way that this escalates is not only are things getting more aggressive on the field, but kids are doing it in the lunchrooms as well. Like, they seem to be getting more aggressive and rough every time they eat. And in fact, I have this scene in my head how late at night she's awoken to a commotion and she runs out to see two kids who are fighting in the middle of the halls. And she runs to the trainer and she says, oh my God, they're fighting. And the trainer will say, yeah, my money's on the little one. And so she realizes, like, there's like a fighting ring or something happening there. And she'll realize that something's happening with the doctor, who, don't call him Dr. Lobotis, that's too on the nose. But the idea is that he's doing something in their food or something with them, how every time they get badly injured, they come back and they're drone-like. But there's something in their food that's making them more aggressive this whole time. Now, I don't care whether you do my plotline or you do their plotline of making sports more dangerous in general, but I still like the idea of leaning into the idea of them training her up to be the brains as they're going to be the brawn. And so, in my eyes, get rid of this lady, Oksana, whatever her name is, doesn't matter. Have Dr. Lobotis being the main villain, because then he can have this whole like, oh, well, yeah, the coach is teaching all the muscle. They're the brawn, but we're the brains. I want you to come under my wing so that you can become the tactician for these teams. And so the idea is sort of dividing this idea into brutes and monsters, and then the smart people who don't have to deal with these violent people. But when she starts to reject them, that's when they force her onto the field. And then you can have actual scary moments where this tiny little girl who is scared of everything has to protect herself. Because that's one of the biggest issues I have with this book, that when the main character is aggressive, well, she shouldn't be scared because she's the most dangerous thing out there. So it makes more sense to have the main character be this little scared girl who has no place on this field with these monsters. And she manages to save herself by using those speed chess tactics, by being like, okay, well, I can see they're moving faster and this one's really rough, so if I move in that line and then across there, I can avoid their attacks. Using tactics, and then using the rules of the game, like deliberately stepping out of bounds and causing a penalty when they're about to tackle her to stop her from getting hurt, which isn't the best for the game, but it's the best for her safety. And then, of course, we'd lead up to the breaking game where it's 1 versus 1, and it's her versus her sister, who's now been fully brainwashed by all this stuff. She's been taught, you got to be aggressive, you got to fight, you got to beat them. And this is the twist that I love to lead to. This is where the book should have ended. Stuff this whole you need to be violence nonsense. The sister is there fighting her, and she's tackling her, and she's using the same tactics, but when it comes to Marsha Stevens, she is a monster on the field. This is the breaking game. She can break her bones just by grabbing her with those big hands. And so, as she's fighting her, that's when she realizes the way to win. No matter what her tactics are, she can't beat her sister, because it's an unfair game. But that's the trick. It's the breaking game. What if you broke the rules? Why are we fighting each other? We are in an unfair system. The people we should be fighting is the doctor and the coach. Isn't that a much better twist? So then it's like, well, that's how you win the game. Don't play their game, play our game. We're strong enough to stop them with our brains and our brawn. And so then they use what they can to grab the coach so they can wrap him up in the tape. Hey, that's a fun little callback. And then Akiba goes to the doctor and stops him. And, that he can do the whole, I was trying to stop them from playing sport or whatever. And they'll say, we're shutting this place down. So then finally they can get to the phone, call the police, and shut this whole horrible, abusive system down. Isn't that a better story than violence is good, weird portkey magic dream sequence nonsense? No, stuff that. The breaking game could have been a great story. It just wasn't. And then of course the little cherry on the top of the sundae is that the writing is bad because it keeps being wrong. Not only with the bad onomatopoeia, but the things that contradicts things back and forth about whether or not they have phones or don't have phones, whether or not she sleeps or didn't sleep, whether or not the day is over or they're still doing the same day, or whether or not they're still in the same sport, or when they jump from chapter to the next chapter, cutting out the bit in the middle, which is the collision, the bit that I think would be scariest. I mean, obviously, drugs and mind control and all that stuff is scary, but to me, what I thought would be the scary factor in this book and what makes it creepy is sports injuries. That's scary because it's real, but it's also not kids dying, I mean, it's not usually, not when it's not a cartoon universe like in this book. And so I thought that would be the scary moment. How scary is it to be in a sporting field, playing a game with someone else who is coming at you, and then looking at your leg and seeing that it is crooked because the bone is broken, and then the pain suddenly reaches your nerves and you feel this, and you are this broken thing on the field screaming in pain as your enemy is still standing above you, looking down on the weakling that you now are. Like, how is that not scary, man? Come on, I could see that being the scary thing, but instead this book just goes, no, end the chapter, new chapter, hey, they got hurt, let's skip over that. I'm still willing to give Scott Charles the benefit of the doubt because some of the stuff is funny. Like, I don't think it worked in the scene near the end, but some of the stuff that Coach Kellyak says is relatively funny. Some of the silly things, like in the contract, whilst I thought it was kind of creepy, things like, yeah, we have a brain matter donation thing just in the contract, just in case. Like, I think he has a good sense of humor. I don't think that he writes well enough to engage with that in a horror book, and I'd be interested to see what some of his other books are like. But I am glad that this is the last CreepTown book that he's written, because I genuinely do not think he is good at chapter spooks. Now, I did enjoy some of the different ideas, and maybe it's just because this is shorter, but I'm willing to give this one a C-. Maybe it is bad, but I think it's not as egregious as some of the things I saw in the other books. There's lying to the reader, the storylines which don't know how to follow tone, which make the main character just completely unable to be understood. But at least there are some ideas in here that I liked. I didn't think it was written the way that I think would make it a scary story, but it had enough in there that it's a C- in my eyes. So what can you learn from this book? Well, lesson number 1 is editors exist for a reason. Now, if you're an independent author, here's my suggestion for you. If you write something and you want to edit it, the issue with you editing it yourself is that you know what you meant, or you had an idea in your head that you expressed in those words, so that feels right to you. So your brain is predisposed to understand what you've said, whereas if someone else is coming in, they aren't, and so that's why it's good to get an editor come in. If you can't get an editor, I recommend either you should let your manuscript or chapter, whatever it is you want to edit, let it sit for about a month and then read it. Or if you can't wait a month, if you've got a more strict timeline, I recommend that you set it aside for about a week And in the intervening week, make sure that you read other books, get your mind off your words and onto someone else's words. That way, when you finally get back to your manuscript and read it, you have a fresh set of eyes, because you may not realize that you've made some mistake. I mean, I do it all the time. I read my work and then I'll realize that I've said something twice, or I'll switch over someone's names, or the number of times how I've gone to the first chapter to make sure that my character has the same colored hair throughout the entire book is more often than I'd like to admit. But the point is that editors exist for a reason. We don't realize we're making these, and it's hard to keep all of this stuff in your head at once. That's why we write this down. That's why we have to plan it out. So the easiest way to do this is to just get an editor. A lot of publishers do have editors on staff for this reason. Do not underestimate their value. If one editor read this book, this would be worth a C+ in my eyes. All those stupid little mistakes, all those little errors in continuity, it's inexcusable in a published book as far as I'm concerned. It just makes your book that much better. I mean, the only way to get it even higher than that would be to have a better plot, but that's not the editor's job. But hey, you know what? Some editors are nice enough to read through and say, look, I found these mistakes. Also, I'm getting the vibe that a reader wouldn't like this, so they can suggest that. That's more of a beta reader thing, but hey, some editors will tell you if they didn't enjoy it, they'll let you know. And as someone who owns a blog, I've learned the hard way that I will write my blogs and then post them, and then I'll look at them a week later and see ridiculous mistakes I've made. So that's fine for online blog stuff. It is not okay in a published chapter book. The second thing that I think this book brings to the front of my mind is a simple lesson that I was taught in writing class. And I think that you can adapt it over time, but it still is a foundational lesson. And that is, when you're writing your book, every single scene, in fact, you could even argue every single sentence, but that's getting really granular, but every single scene in your book should serve one of two purposes. It should develop character or develop plot. In this book, it feels too long, but it's because we get these long scenes of people just talking, or people saying, oh no, that's not that, it was this other thing. Like that first scene, the very first scene when our characters are on the road and they're walking to the camp. That's 5 chapters. Now, some of those are broken up because of ridiculous chapter scare moments, how they split up. But still, 5 chapters of, oh, walking to the school. Oh, we're going to this school. Oh, it's not this school, it's that school. Oh, hey, there's this character. Oh, we'll talk to her. Hey, she's got this thing about the school with the pamphlet. We'll read the pamphlet. Oh, hey, what about this other thing? 5 chapters. This is excessive, and you don't need all of this stuff. They're going to the school. They could have learned this stuff as they were walking to the gate. And then, why do they have the stuff with the Jeep? Like, we're going to learn later on the field that these people wrap people up in tape, so you don't need to do this earlier. And in fact, it doesn't actually work for the tension of the story. It doesn't develop the plot nicely. So cut all of the guff, and this would be such a better story if it was just clean. Okay, this scene is here because it's about the kids going to the camp, and then this scene is here because the kids are learning that the camp is not what they expected, and this scene is here because it's teaching the kids about the tape. That makes so much more sense to the reader to read a story where every scene leads you a bit further along in the plot. Or, like I said, if it's not about the plot, like, hey, why was there not a scene where our character realized that she was as violent as she was? Like, it could have happened on that first night. She says she didn't sleep and then she sleeps, but hey, what if instead of not sleeping and then sleeping, what if she just didn't sleep all night because she was thinking about the person she turned Maddie into? And thinking, wow, that's scary. But then thinking, well, she's scary because I'm looking at what she saw in me. She saw that from me, and so she decided to become it so it would never happen to her ever again. That makes sense as a character building epiphany moment. And then, as it happens early in the book, that would make sense why she would slowly start to realize, I don't want to be that person anymore. Then you'd have character growth and then plot development, instead of all this nonsense about explosions and then go-karts and then arrows and then jumping over the fast forwarding through kids getting injured and then zombie stuff. Every scene in your book should develop your story. I think as you get better at writing, you'll realize that there's a couple of times how some of the tone building is related to plot building, although it's not technically character or plot. And so I think as you get better at writing, then you can start using some scenes deliberately to set tone or vibes for your book. but you should make sure that everything you've written in your story helps your story. Otherwise, there's only one place your story is going, and that's straight to CreepTown. So that not only ends the third book in the CreepTown series, it also ends season 1 of Chapter Spooks. I figure I want to have about 30 episodes in each season, and so I'll have a bit of a break before I get to the next one. Now, my original plan was to work on season 2 next year, but if I find myself reading some books, don't be surprised if I decide to jump the gun and release them a lot earlier than I did this time around. But in the intervening time, I am so excited to announce that in about a week's time, since this episode's being put out, so it's going to be the 25th of October, I'm going to be giving a TED Talk. Yeah, TEDx Albury 2025, so independently organized, but still a TEDx talk. I'm going to be giving a TED Talk about cognitive narratology. I'm not going to go into too many spoilers, but if you like hearing me talk about why fiction and stories matter, well, keep your ear to the ground and watch my TED Talk. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm a bit nervous, but I'm also really, really excited. So, I mean, even if you don't get another podcast from me, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. And I can't believe I can say that unironically. It's a weird world we live in. So yeah, please seek out my TED Talk. It's going to be fun. I've been working on it really hard. It's going to be really cool. And if you want to get in touch with me before the next season, or even after the next season of this podcast comes out, I'll be at chapterspooks@gmail.com. And I don't want to spoil all of the books I'm looking into, but I do have a plan to focus on some of these Chapter Spooks books out there that have weird gimmicks. I've got 30 books already on the slate. I'm really looking forward to it. I've got so many things of these plans, I wouldn't be surprised if I decide to jump the gun and release it early. But yeah, so keep an eye out for the next podcast. Keep an eye out for my TEDx talk. And hey, as always, if you thought this was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time. Bye-bye.